Consciousness, food, and antinatalism, the crossroad of life, nutrition, and the will to not live. Do plants feel pain? No, they don't. But wait a minute. Let's watch that intro again. I got myself some keynote. Watch out. Do plants feel pain? Sometimes, possibly. But do they feel pain? No. Or maybe they do. But have I ever said they feel pain? No, I haven't. I have not said that. I've said they don't feel pain, that pain was neurological. I just made a video where I said derived energy was worshiping pain, and I showed pictures of neurons, of pain neurons specifically. I have said pain is a neurological phenomenon. What I did say so far about the plant feeling is that plants look like they can feel sunlight. To me, I said heliotropic movement. Looks like they see the sun. They're tracking it. That's what it looks like, I said. And I suggested a little bit more on the internal guess side of things, that plants can feel thirsty. Which makes more sense to me than that there's some sort of machine going bzz, water level 875. No, I think this is how biological systems communicate with themselves. And I did say plants can feel stress because other people are bringing up the pain because, oh, it's all about what is the thing you want to eat. But there's other subjects here. I got in this on. I barely ever talk about the vegetarianism. I got in on the consciousness side, right? So I do say that plants feel stress. And I think that's a precursor and an analog to pain. I think pain is pretty clearly a sophisticated, highly refined, high-tech evolution of the more general, less localized, less high frequency stress. You know, when a plant gets damaged, you know, you feel stressed. Releases a stress hormone, and the cells see that signal and react in stressed ways. But in our case, we have that, and we have a nerve impulse that they don't have, probably. Okay, no, give it away. Okay, keep going. Okay, yeah. Okay. By what means could they feel pain? No, we're not talking about pain. We're talking about how could they feel thirst? How could they feel the sunlight? How could they feel anything? Pain if they did. Whatever. Okay. So a collection of neurons can feel something. We're saying that because there's nothing central, right? The nerve all alone doesn't have this consciousness. It's something that it does in the network all collect. So it's a distributed network. It can feel something. How can a collection of plant cells feel something? We're not looking for something in the center, but it has to be like the neurons can do it. Somehow it has to do that. This is a plant cell. You know, it's the same kinds of things. There's an extra, what is that stuff? Cellulose cell wall. But behind that, there's the regular membrane, and there's inside there's a lot of similar thing. Other than the chloroplasts are different, and a lot of the very same things, the ribosomes and the nucleus, right? The chemical machinery inside the cell. Okay, and for that matter, a paramecium, same thing. You know, it's got this cell membrane. What's the difference? Okay, in the case of the neuron, and the other cells, cells have receptors for chemical signals, right? Including the neuron. Nerves have an additional kind of receptor, the dendrites, and also an additional way of emitting signals. So they can emit chemical signals outward through the membrane. But nerves have this extra way through their dendrites of taking a signal. Right? These signals are analogous to the chemical signals that the cells were evolved for so long to work with. You have one kind of receptor that became sensitive to an electromagnetic signal. It's analogous to the receptors. Something triggers this receptor. Instead of a chemical in the environment, it's really a signal generated by a chemical in another cell. So it's as if it simulates the other cell being the environment. And then it goes into the cell body and chemicals are produced. So those signals map into chemicals being produced on the inside of the cell. And also on the axon where the nerve signal will be going out, it's similar. Instead of producing a chemical, you produce a chemical that triggers a chain reaction. The axon shoots out to where the dendrites from other nerves pick it up. So the principle is that these nerve signals are turning into chemicals in the cell and then translated back into and causing things to happen in the cell and then transmitting as well. So they map back and forth from chemicals to the neurological signals. Somehow, whatever signals neurons get, this is supposedly enabling consciousness. And those can be gotten through chemical channels, whatever internal process. Well, let's put it this way. I'll start a little bit back. Classically, for my purposes, nerve cells work by taking signals from the dendrites from which the signals enter the cell. The signals are propagated somehow through the cell. Then the cell, as part of this propagation, produces a signal transmitted out the axon. So I'm saying, what if we just, as a thought experiment, keep the part about propagating inside the cell, whatever that is, that remains the same. But instead of delivering the signals through the axon, it's delivered a different way. So imagine the nerve cell in which the part of the dendrite that connects to another nerve is replaced with a chemical receptor that stimulates the same response as a real firing, but instead of being attached to another nerve, the dendrites are just sensitive to chemical messages transcribed in RNA. This is not a theory I believe is true. I'm just saying you can imagine RNA does encode information. You have a signal. Instead of a neurological signal, you have a little piece of RNA that is a note with the same information. And when received by a cell, the neuron that doesn't have any of the tentacles going out, but it's the core part of the neuron, and where its tentacle is, it's getting an RNA and turning that into whatever would happen inside the single cell. Now, it can't, it's just a single cell. And then on the other side, it's releasing the stuff out. If the chemicals, the RNA has to be channeled, fine. Then there's some sort of, vascular system. Okay, you could have the same internal cell response. Now, such system like that, you'd be getting all the same nerve impulses, but it'd be slow. It'd be slower, right? But why couldn't such a neuron group communicating that way still be conscious? If they could be conscious with high-speed connections, why couldn't they be conscious with slow connections, but conscious more slowly? If you have an answer to that, you better give it, because we're moving on. Now, first, a little interlude before I get to the stuff that's like, Hameroff and quantum consciousness interludes. Well, if you think that neurons disembodied from their dendrites and axons like that could not be conscious, then that's the same as implying that some fundamental part of consciousness is in the dendrites. Right? It's in the dendrites, which ironically, I just wanted to point out, is what Hameroff says That's where he says it is. It's in the microtubules that as a signal comes along the dendrite, it's being processed by the lattice work, which operates at least as a classical computer. He thinks, of course, a quantum computer, but whichever. There's definitely signals going along these. The microtubules carry the signals. It travels rapidly and changes along the way. It's not just amplified and transmitted. It gets processed. That's Hameroff's theory. Right, so he does think that the dendrites, so he does think that my disembodied things wouldn't work. Okay. And even if he were to give up on the quantum stuff, I mean, just the classical computation in the dendrites due to just this very long lattice implies that they're a necessary part of what the neuron does. After all, the cell body of the neuron has a lot of just ordinary cell stuff that obviously are just ordinary cell stuff and not, whatever's going on particularly with the consciousness, as far as especially you all think. So these really long, it makes sense that structures crucial to what a nerve does that characterizes it for us would be in those special features potentially. Okay. Also, Hameroff doesn't really support this. Not everything is conscious. Things can just be acting in an unconscious or classical kind of a way. So, plants are not necessarily, I think you would probably say plants aren't conscious. But weird things can be conscious in a system. So it just depends on what the energies and masses are, and so on. But, Hameroff's explanation does, though, in general, make a more critical thing about animal neurons being special because of neural gap junctions, something that the plant nerves do not have. Wait, do plants have nerves? Well, let's talk about the plant nervous system. The source of this is, you see, there it is. I want you to see this. Plant nervous system. This is what I'm going to be reading from. For a long time, plants were thought to be living organisms whose limited ability to move and respond was appropriately matched by limited abilities of sensing. Exceptions were made for plants with rapid and purposeful movements such as Mimosa pudica, also called the sensitive plant, Drosera, sundews, Dionaea muscipula, flytraps, and tendrils of climbing plants. Probably mispronounced something. These sensitive plants attracted the attention of outstanding pioneer researchers like Pfeffer, Burden-Sanderson, Darwin, Haberlandt, and Bose. They found them not only to be equipped with various mechanoreceptors exceeding the sensitivity of a human finger, but also to trigger action potentials that implement these movements. By the way, action potentials are how nerves work. I'm not reading the whole thing, but these are just a couple excerpts. Other studies found that AP-like signals propagate with equal rate and amplitude through all cells of the vascular bundle. Starting studies with isolated vascular bundles, e.g. from the fern Adiantum, Bose found increasing amplitudes of heat-induced spikes by repeated stimulation, heat-induced, and incubation in a 0.5% solution of sodium carbonate. Since the electrical behavior of isolated vascular strands was comparable to that of isolated frog nerves, Bose felt justified to refer to them as plant nerves. NIH.gov. Moving along in time, it describes, although at the time a hardly noticed event, the discovery that normal plants such as pumpkins had propagating APs just as the esoteric sensitive plants was a scientific breakthrough with important consequences. First, it corrected the long-held belief that normal plants are simply less sensitive and responsive than the so-called sensitive plants from Mimosa divinus flytraps. Second, It led to the stimulating belief that so widely distributed electrical signals must carry important messages. Widely distributed electrical signals must carry important messages. The ensuing studies made considerable progress in linking electrical signals with respiration and photosynthesis, pollination, phloem transport, and the rapid plant-wide deployment of plant defense. The ensuing studies made considerable progress linking electrical signals in vascular tubes in plants to respiration, to breathing, to photosynthesis, kind of eating, pollination, sexual reproduction, and rapid plant-wide deployment of plant defenses. It's probably time to move the goalposts from, well, what possible mechanism to what exact mechanism. Haberlandt came to the conclusion that the only nerve-like structures of plants were situated in the long phloem cells of the vascular bundles. From that time on, papers, lectures, and textbooks reiterated statements that plants have no nerves. This unproductive expression ignores the work of Darwin, Haberlandt, Pfeffer, and Bose, together with the fact that in spite of their anatomical differences, nerve cell networks and vascular bundles share the analog function of conducting electrical signals. Similar anatomical differences have not been an obstacle to stating that both plants and animals consist of cells. The mechanistic similarity of excitations, consisting of a transient decline in cell input resistance, in plant and nerve cells was later elegantly demonstrated by the direct comparison of action potentials in Nutella and the giant axon of squids. Today, consideration of nerve-like structures in plants involves increasingly more aspects of comparison. We know that many plants can efficiently produce electric signals in the form of action potentials and slow wave potentials, and that the long-distance propagation of these signals proceeds in the vascular bundles. So, this is, okay, NIH.gov. Today, consideration of nerve-like structures in plants involves increasingly more aspects of comparison. We know, it says that, we know that many plants can efficiently produce electrical signals in the form of action potentials like those in nerves and slow wave potentials, and that the long-distance propagation of these signals proceeds in the vascular bundles. We also know that plants like Dionaea can propagate APs with high efficiency and speed without the use of vascular bundles, probably because their cells are electrically coupled through plasmodesmata. So, interesting. So plants use electrical signals. Interesting. How odd. How strange. Other analogies with neurobiology include vesicle-operated intercellular clefts and axal root tissues, the so-called plant synapses, as well as the certain existence and operation of substances like neurotransmitters and synaptogens in plant cells. The identification of the roles of these substances in plants will have important implications. Altogether, modern plant neurobiology might emerge as a coherent science. Electrophysiological and other studies of long-distance signals in plants and animals greatly contributed to our knowledge of the living world by revealing important similarities and crucial differences between plants and animals in an area that might directly relate to their different capacities to respond to environmental signals. Even at this stage, the results are surprising. Rather than lacking electrical signals, higher plants have developed more than just one signal type that is able to cover large distances. In addition to APs that also occur in animals and lower plants, higher plants feature an additional unique hydraulically propagated type of electrical signal called slow wave potentials.